Insperity presents the Small Business Advocate Show with Jim Blasingame, brought to you by FedEx, CareerBuilder.com, and Palo Alto Software. This is a copyrighted production of Small Business Network, Inc., all rights reserved.
We're back at 7 till. I'm Jim Blasingame. Thank you very much for hanging out with us. Steve Forbes is our guest. He's chairman and CEO of chairman and editor-in-chief of Forbes Media. That's Forbes.com, the website, the magazine, all the other properties that they have. So many different properties. Steve, thanks again for hanging out with us. Congratulations on the success of the website.
Well, thank you. We've had now, Jim, 30 million unique visitors a month so far this year. So traffic is good. And
it was only 20 when I started posting my stuff up there, and look what happened after that, Steve.
Well, you see, 50% increase. You got pulling power, Jim.
That's the story I'm sticking to, Steve. Hey, Steve, thanks again for hanging out with us. Let's talk about the economy. It is going to be the economy, stupid, isn't it?
It is, and the key thing there is, and this is where Romney and the Republicans have a great chance, is putting forth positive proposals on taxes, regulations, and the like. People know this economy, even though it's doing better now, is still not in third or fourth gear yet. We're barely in second gear, and this is the worst recovery. Some argue that it's proportionately a worse recovery than what we had from the Great Depression. The Depression was deep, but initially we had a sharp bounce back, and we have no bounce back this time. No sharp bounce back.
Steve, the polling that I cover, that I report on here on the show, the NFIB report, the Tatum survey, all indicate, and the polling that we do here internally with our audience, especially online, indicates that small business owners, Main Street small businesses, are still not excited about the economy. In fact, the most recent poll that we took showed 88% of our audience was either just doing okay or not doing well at all. Only 12% were doing great, and that's three years after the recession's over. That may not be stagnation, but that's not fast growth. And so I think that's going to come to bear.
It's a buggy cart on the Indy 500. It's not going very far.
And isn't to me the fundamental driver of that sentiment on Main Street, to me, is uncertainty. What do you think?
It is uncertainty, and you don't know. Well, just take we're talking about Obamacare. I was in Alaska a few weeks ago, and big restaurant owner there has a couple of very successful establishments, said Obamacare is going to crush them, imposed costs. Mm-hmm. And you hear that everywhere. So if you don't know what the rules of the game are, very hard to prepare for the next game.
Steve, you've got a big platform. You just talked about 30 million unique visitors to your website. I know your magazine's doing great. I would like to encourage you, if you haven't already been, I don't think I've seen you talk about this lately, I would really like to encourage you to talk about, in your articles and in your editorials, the real unemployment rate. Forget this household rate. That's bogus. 8.3%, whatever it is, that's a bogus number in the 21st century. We've got to be talking about the real number of displaced people who want to work, who can't get the employment that they want. It's closer to 14% and closer to 22 million Americans. That's the number we got to be talking about, Steve.
And I think that's going to be a major issue in the campaign. And people sense that whatever number you come up with each month, it's far, far higher than it should be. And one of the things, we're both old enough to remember the early 80s when the Reagan recovery kicked in. There are some months where they're creating 800,000 jobs a month. And when the president was running for re-election in 84, the unemployment rate was still around 7%. Mm-hmm. But people felt that this thing was going in the right direction, and millions of jobs are being created. But to get to your point, millions of people were returning to the labor force that had dropped out. Mm-hmm. So here, we were getting a little lower unemployment rate, but you have millions of people standing on the sidelines.
Well, that's exactly right. We've got a much more diverse much more stratified unemployment situation today than we did. It's much more stubborn than the one 30 years ago that you talked about, Steve. And we're going to have some real leadership. We're going to have somebody in Washington who understands what it takes to employ a worker. And I think that's going to be the big part of the election coming up. Hey, Steve, thank you for being here. Good job today, as always. What's your prediction on the election right now?
Well, I'm going against the grain. I think whoever wins the GOP nomination, and it looks like it's Romney, is going to win the general election. I don't care what the polls say right now.
You heard it here first, folks, from Steve Forbes. Steve, thanks again for being here. Good job. Come back again real soon.
Look forward to it, Jim. Thank you.
Thank you. Steve Forbes, ladies and gentlemen, a great American. As I've said many times before, I'd be happy to live in America where there was a President Steve Forbes. I got to go for this hour. I'm Jim Blasingame reminding you a ship in the harbor is safe, but that's not what ships were made for.
Insperity presents the Small Business Advocate Show with Jim Blasingame, brought to you by FedEx, CareerBuilder.com, and Palo Alto Software. This is a copyrighted production of Small Business Network, Inc., intended for the private use of our audience. Except as otherwise provided by copyright law, all other copying, redistribution, or publication without prior written consent is prohibited. All rights reserved.